And the Constitutional Bench today refused to grant legal recognition for queer marriages in India. The bench, however, directed the government to form a panel to examine the rights and entitlements of people involved in queer union. Somewhere down the line, could the court have taken a more progressive stand? Did they take a conservative stand, or they just followed the letter of law, missing a historic opportunity? Take a look.
The Supreme Court of India has stopped well short of granting marriage rights to same-sex couple. In a unanimous verdict, a 5-judge bench headed by Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud ruled that the law doesn't allow same-sex marriage.
The Constitution does not expressly recognize a fundamental right to marry. An institution cannot be elevated to the realm of a fundamental right based on the content accorded to it by law.
The top court, while pronouncing the judgment, said it was not possible for the court to frame a law on the issue, can only interpret existing laws. The bench, comprising Justices Chandrachud, S.K. Kaul, Ravindra Bhatt, Hema Kohli and P.S. Narasimha, in the 3-2 majority verdict, decided against allowing civil unions for same-sex couples. The court also declined to allow adoption rights for same-sex couples. The judges said a committee may be formed to look into the concerns of the same-sex couples.
They've all taken the same position on the question of whether the Special Marriage Act can be interfered with and can it be struck down as unconstitutional, whether certain provisions can be struck down as unconstitutional. On that, the bench has agreed that it is for the legislature to look into this particular issue. It's for the parliament to look into this issue.
The verdict is a big blow to same-sex couples who were hoping for at least civil union rights.
आज का जो वर्डिक्ट सुप्रीम कोर्ट का था उसके ऊपर हम लोगों का बहुत उम्मीद था, लेकिन आई थिंक इट हैज बीन वेरी डिसअपॉइंटिंग। पार्लियामेंट के ऊपर ये छोड़ दिया है जो बहुत ही डिसअपॉइंटिंग है। गवर्नमेंट जो डिसीजन लेता है वो मोस्टली वो ह्यूमन राइट्स के ऊपर जो सही जो गलत उसके ऊपर नहीं होता है। उनकी विचार होता है कि किससे ज़्यादा वोट मिले, क्या पॉपुलिस्ट है।
With the Supreme Court ruling against same-sex marriage, the LGBT community will pin their hopes on Parliament passing a law that accommodates them.
The LGBT community is saying that while this is a recognition of their rights and of their existence, it is going to be a long fight ahead to actually get the rights of marriage and the rights that come from the institution of marriage in India. In New Delhi, with cameraman Ridul, this is Anisha Mathur for India Today.
Well, what's really happened is that the petitioners in this case deeply disappointed, especially in the kind of language that the judge, the constitutional bench used. It seemed it's going to be a very progressive verdict. But many would suggest that ultimately it came down to the letter of law, and that is what the court followed. Let's break it down. Let's cut across right now immediately. Joining me in the studio is my colleague Anisha. She was there in court today. What was a red letter day, Anisha, but at least the petitioners deeply disappointed. There is a sense of despondency which seems to emanate from the fact that this was a missed opportunity.
Well, definitely, Preeti. We've been speaking to the lawyers, we've been speaking to the petitioners. All of them are saying that, well, we were hoping that the court will go a little bit further than it did, especially with the minority verdict of the Chief Justice and Justice Kaul, talking about civil unions at least being given some sort of recognition in the country. That is where the hopes had been pinned, that something like that could be created. But even in that, we need to remember that the court has said that even if we do give recognition to something on the lines of a civil union, the actual rights, the actual regulations that the petitioners want a change in is something that will require legislative work to be done, because this will require change in multiple laws. But on a more hopeful note, the issue that the petitioners are also saying is that at least this conversation is happening. At least there is a recognition that we not only exist, but we deserve and we have fundamental rights of dignity, privacy, choice. And that is something, at least one step has been taken towards recognition.
Let's quickly bring in the petitioners because they've been fighting the good fight for years now. Joining me is Harish Iyer, petitioner. He was a petitioner today, disappointed, I understand. Zainab Patel, petitioner, disappointed. Zainab, I want to begin with you. It's been a long, drawn-out battle where the fight for equal rights is concerned, especially when it came down to equality in marriage. What do you make of the judgment today, especially the kind of conversation that happened earlier in terms of what the Chief Justice of India said? But ultimately, do you only look at the fine print, which said not allowed?
Thank you. I think I'm going to just say something which might sound very harsh, but that is the truth and the reality. A lot of words were used, but very little meaning came out of those words. Very insightful, very wise words, but they are like wise words in an old book. My personal viewpoint is that the Supreme Court abdicated its responsibility towards the LGBTIQ community, although we do see some wins for the trans community and in some way an executive committee looking at some rights within the institutional framework of a partnership or a union. But again, that's subject to how the government is going to play it out. What is the time frame? What is the duration that would be required to set up something like this? But to be very frank, I just feel that here was this momentous occasion in the history of time to backroll any of the negativity that was thrown towards the community. And as someone who's been involved both in the Nalsa judgment as well as in the marriage equality case, I felt that this opportunity was lost. However, I'm not one of those who will get bogged down by this. My community is known to be strong and resilient. We will fight back. We will ensure whatever gains we've made, there will be a larger outlay of this.
Zainab, I'm going to just come in for a minute, and the reason I'm doing so is because I know a lot of you are deeply disappointed. So many of our guests, we were going to have a lot of petitioners today. They're crushed, devastated in terms of what has happened today. But I want to ask you, looking at where the law stands, what did you think that the courts could have done better in terms of interpreting the law?
See, the only thing that I really expected today, without being too frivolous or too over-expectant about the court, was the fact that a clear roadway towards civil unions would have come true. I was expecting that as a minimum guarantee, considering the months of effort put by all of us in arguing our case. That was a real-time disappointment because that framework is absolutely absent in any of the directions given by the Supreme Court in their 300-odd page order.
Right. Okay. Harish Iyer, at least, some would suggest a conversation has started where you talk about not just what a marriage means, but the modalities that go into the marriage where rights of spouses come into question.
I think the conversation has moved ahead. The conversation has been moving ahead, and the conversation is moving not because of anything else, but because of the LGBTQI plus community by itself. I think, as Zainab rightly said, the court could have. This was a momentous occasion where the court could have. All the wrongs that have been happening with the LGBTQI plus community, this was an opportunity to correct all of that, to at least provide a pathway to some kind of legalization where if my partner was dying in a hospital bed, I would be given some rights at least guaranteed by law that I could take decisions for them. I think this was a moment where we could have done really well. And again, it might sound really harsh, but it was all a play of beautiful words strung together in strings of hope. But we are tired of hope. We just don't want to keep hoping. We want to start hopping into a new future, start hopping into a world where our rights and our love is recognized. For now, we just have the right to have sex, consensual sex with our partners in private. We hardly have got any other right in this country, but we are not going to be tired. We are not going to be bogged down. We are going to fight this out, and we are going to not rest until we have absolute and equal rights as our heterosexual cisgender counterparts.
We do apologize somewhere down the line because, we understand your pain, and it is a long, protracted legal battle which lies ahead, especially, Anisha, where I bring you in. This is it's a constitutional bench. To overturn something like this is difficult, but how do you see it once again come into the purview of law? Because from here on, the court has said that a committee needs to be formed, that it's in the ambit of the parliament. But we all know, cutting across party lines, no party will actually come out and back equal rights, especially when it comes down to marriage. We've seen how the center has reacted, where at one level they actually called homosexuality an urban concept.
Well, see, the unfortunate reality of the world and the country that we live in is that a lot moves only when there is a vote bank or a pressure group or some sort of benefit to a political party involved. And that is the unfortunate reality we live in. What I'm looking at this, however, and hope springs eternal, as they say, at least the idea that there must be protection accorded to these relationships, at least that has now come out in a Supreme Court verdict. Yes, the problem here is that there is no timeline. The problem here is that we don't know when, if, how it will happen. But at least it is become a part of a general conversation. At least there is a Supreme Court verdict saying you must do this. So now
But but it falls short, Anisha, because, let's look at it. Were we expecting the court to give, rights where marriage was concerned to the LGBTQIA plus community? Not quite, because they could have said it's in the ambit of law. What could the court have done? They could have, at least when it came down to civil union, they could have, made more changes in that, or, stressed on that more, and at least give a time frame to the committee that they've asked the government to form. Hitesh Jain, I'll bring you in. Advocate, Supreme Court lawyer, is also with us. How do you look at the ruling? All right, we don't have Hitesh Jain, but, Anisha, if you'd want to take that question.
See, speaking about the law and the legal provisions, yes, the court could have done more. What the minority judgment has said, for example, with respect to civil unions and the right to enter into a civil union, that could have been done. But then again comes the question of the letter of the law, and that is where this entire debate of what can the Supreme Court really have done, that is where it sort of hinges, that could the Supreme Court have redefined what husband and wife means? Could they not have created a new relationship of a civil union? Could they not have at least said, well, this exists, so you must recognize it?
Zainab, is that why you feel let down? Because at least when it came down to civil union, it was the rights that you were looking at, maybe not the sanctity of it. Or at least right now, not the sanctity of it. Zainab, that's questions for you. Harish, can you take that question? I don't think Zainab can hear me.
I think what we were looking for is a passage to the right towards civil unions. I mean, in the sense, what is marriage? If you remove if you look at the Hindu Marriage Act, the Muslim Marriage Act, you look at all the marriage acts, it's basically a legal contract between two people. Even if there was a pathway to a legal contract, where there's some sort of legal recognition to a relationship, call it civil union, call it whatever good word that we could choose for it. But if there was some sort of a legal contract, pathway to a legal contract between two people that they could get into, it would have been beautiful. Because what really are we fighting for? We are really fighting for not just the right to sing "Hum Aapke Hain Kaun," have "Hum Aapke Hain Kaun" kind of weddings. That's not the right that we are fighting for. We are already having "Hum Aapke Hain Kaun" type weddings. LGBT people are having those weddings. We are asking for legal recognition of those relationships. So if there was a pathway, some sort of a pathway towards the legal recognition. And seriously, the other thing that I also wanted to stress on is the Supreme Court has done exactly what the Navteet Singh Johar judgment the directive to the government was that you need to create more awareness, you need to ensure that there's less prejudice. Those were the same directives that were given
Right.
to the government. There's the same history repeating itself. You're just giving directives over directives, but not having any. There is no
You know,
timeline to it. There is no plan to it.
right. Hari, stay with me. I want to bring in Hitesh Jain into this conversation, Advocate Supreme Court. Hitesh Jain, you said you call this the verdict historic. Why so? Because especially where the petitioners are concerned, they're deeply disappointed because we were standing at the cusp of history and we just didn't take that leap.
Well, I don't think you have to look at this judgment only from the lens as to who has got what and who is not getting anything. First thing, as far as the doctrine of separation of powers is concerned, I think we have made a progress where the Supreme Court has said that in a strict sense, we do not follow the doctrine of separation of powers, but we recognize the essential functions of one arm of the state. And as far as the essential functions doctrine, which was introduced today by the Supreme Court has clearly stated that one arm of the state will not encroach upon the essential function of another arm. Second, this judgment also, we have seen, one can see and a progress has been made. This case was not about for or against case for the LGBT. As far as the government of the day is concerned, the government clearly recognized the rights and acknowledged the rights that flowed, as the earlier speaker was mentioning, that was given by the Supreme Court in the Navtej Singh. The government has acknowledged the right. The only question that was pending before the court, and which is the most important question, whether the Supreme Court can grant such rights or such rights have to be granted by the legislature. As far as the right to queer is concerned, it is a very important recognition the Supreme Court has given, and unanimously all the 5 judges have recognized the rights of queer, the rights that they are entitled, basic domestic rights, basic fundamental rights have been acknowledged and have been respected. The only thing what the Supreme Court has done today is they are saying that as far as all the other rights are concerned, it does not come within our domain. You have to go to the parliament. The parliament is the right and the appropriate forum. And therefore, it is the parliament which is the important stakeholder. The Supreme Court has also taken on record about the suggestion that was made by the government of the day when the Solicitor General made a statement that a committee headed by a cabinet secretary will be appointed, which will look into all the issues and then take a proper informed decision. So I think we have made a progress. It's and therefore I say this is a historic verdict.
But, the petitioners don't see it as historic. But let me bring in Karuna Nandi into this conversation. Karuna Nandi, where did we fall short, where the Supreme Court ruling today was concerned? The petitioners were hoping history would be made. But having said that, if the top court hadn't touched the issue of marriage, could they have done more on civil union?
What we were hoping, and we were hoping for at the very least, was a declaration that there is a constitutional right for queer people to be married, and for then that to be taken forward in future decisions or in future legislations. Now, 2 judges have made that finding. They have not said that there is a fundamental right to marry, but they have said that there are particular aspects of marriage that find themselves rooted in Article 21, in Article 19, and for example, the Article 14 analysis of the CARA guidelines with regard to the ability and the right of queer parents to adopt as a couple is rooted in Article 14, and there is a very robust analysis of that. So, and I encourage law students and lawyers to look at that, and indeed I encourage the government to look at that, because the object of when 2 of the most senior judges of the Supreme Court say that there is nothing to show that queer parents are not as loving and that as heterosexual parents, that they provide as safe an environment, that these children have a right to respect and dignity and the same rights that other children have, then I think that at the very least, the government should sit up and listen. Now, what the court has done today, and these are small gains. And I just want to also be clear that we have not gone backwards. We have gone forwards, though the steps are far smaller than our petitioners hoped for. However, queerness has been recognized. There was a lot of talk of same-sex marriage in which non-binary and trans people were being ignored. So queerness and the concomitant rights that come with being a human being of any sexuality, there is a sort of broad, abstract recognition, I think, across the board of those rights. The disagreement comes where two judges have said that the right to marry is rooted in some constitutional rights, and the other three do not agree. But all seem to agree that this is a matter of statute for various legislatures, something, of course, that the petitioners disagree with. In particular, for example, our written submissions, and we briefly touched upon these arguments, as well as Saurabh Kirpal, that Section 15 to 18 provides an entire code where sex is not even mentioned, and nothing needed to be read down, nothing needed to be read in, and just a declaration would have sufficed. However, the right of trans people, when they are of opposite chosen genders, to marry has been recognized. The right and modalities of protecting queer couples against false, illegal action by non-state actors, as well as against criminal cases, that has been recognized. There is encouragement by Justice Call to look at an anti-discrimination law, and that is really the need of the hour. It's extremely important.
Right. But Ms. Nandi, I'll ask you one quick question before, because we have to close the show soon. So I want to ask you, what's the way forward legally now? So, how do you proceed as a lawyer of the petitioners, and how do they proceed if they want to keep the good fight going?
Well, at the moment, really, the ball is in the court of the legislatures. And let us remember that this includes the state legislatures. The state legislatures and the Congress, the other parties that are in and out of power, the DMK, the BJD, all have, under the Constitution, powers over health, for example. So, for example, a government order or a notification can be issued to say that you must, when a queer person appoints their partner to make decisions over their health when they are incapacitated and they can't make these decisions, then the natal family that rejected them in the first place and that they haven't seen for years cannot be the people that make these decisions for them. Right. There are many things that can be done, and there are many things that can be done today.
Right.
Since the union government is speaking in a sympathetic voice, the union government can do the same. It is incumbent, I think, on all the legislatures.
But the union government, Ms. Nandi, had been of the view that homosexuality is an urban concept in any case. But having said that, I want to go back to the two petitioners, Harish Iyer, Zainab Patel. Zainab Patel, with what Ms. Nandi was also stating, do you have faith in the legislature to actually, go ahead and follow, at least in spirit, what the Supreme Court asked of it?
I think as a commoner, I will have to put some trust into the legislature before, because this is a step now in their court. I will work with them like the way we did when the expert committee on transgender issues was set up in the early 2012, 2013. We are willing to work with the government to make sure that at least some of the rights within the framework of a union, a civil union or partnership is made available to desirous couples. The rest in terms of the next legal roadmap will have actually be determined once we speak to a larger cohort of lawyers, etc., in terms of what is it that we could do in the next step. And of course, as Karuna rightly mentioned, we will have to work with other parties in powers and state to look at if the states can step in to bring in marriage reforms or laws that can actually help LGBTIQ people enjoy the full rights of marriage equality.
Harish Iyer, do you have faith in the legislature, especially with the kind of conversation that has gone down? No political party would really want to put, or at least we've seen in the recent past, put their weight behind your cause.
That's not absolutely true, though. There are some people who have put their weight around us. We have had Supriya Sule speak about it. We have had Jagdambika Pal from the BJP who has spoken. Now we have no other choice but to go to the legislatures to further our advocacy. The elections are coming, so it'll be a good time to tell them as well that you'll get our votes. We are 17% of the population. You'll get our votes only if you stand up with us.
Just 10 seconds if I can get Karuna back into this conversation. Karuna, away from, the legislature, legally, what's the way forward now?
Well, we're going to have to look at the judgment's nitty-gritties. It only came out about half an hour ago. And look at what can be done in the interstices. Look, there are various queer rights aside from marriage that have been recognized by this set of judgments. That's a place that additional work can be done. And I wouldn't say that the legislatures should be, binned en masse, right? They are, after all, democratic representatives of all our people. And the state legislatures are very important sites of these protections. And if these parties are going to say that they are a real alternative, then let them demonstrate that.
Okay, I'm running terribly out of time. I appreciate all of you for joining us. Thank you there. So, yes, we were standing at the cusp of history. We didn't quite take that leap, but does that mean we're not going to take it in the coming future? Well, I'm sure we will. It's going to be a long fight, and the petitioners will continue to fight that good fight. Thank you for joining us. A quick break. Up next, Rahul Kamal.
You are watching India Today, powered by Finest, Be Sustainable Change, a BNP Group company.
Pushed to the brink of collapse. Gaza's 2.3 million residents left without power, water, and crumbling health infrastructure. A heart-wrenching reflection of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. A child refusing to leave what was once his family home at Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. Relentless airstrikes making no distinction, as evident from this video. An ambulance in Gaza full of medics and civilians rocked by Israeli bombardment. Emergency crews pulling children from rubble at another location in the besieged enclave. Bodies recovered from a refugee camp. At least 2,778 have been killed and 9,700 wounded in Gaza since the conflict broke out with Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th. combination of devastating Israeli air raids, depleting supplies, and Israel's mass evacuation order for the north of the Gaza Strip has thrown the tiny Gaza Strip into upheaval. According to the UN, more than 1 million people have fled their homes. 60% of them now in approximately 14-kilometer long area south of evacuation zone.
You are watching India Today, powered by Finest, Be Sustainable Change, a BNP Group company.
The Israel-Palestine conflict is back in news with the worst attack that Israel has faced since its creation, making Gaza Strip a war zone. Here we give you a backstory to what and why of the current escalation. A sudden and shocking assault on Israel this past October 7th, a date which was meant to mark the joyous celebration of Simchat Torah. As the nation was in a festive mood, Hamas launched an unparalleled attack on Israeli territory, breaching its land, water and air, firing a barrage of rockets, indulging in ground assault and taking hostages, Israelis and foreign nationals. A grim reminder of the Yom Kippur attack from half a century ago.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way.
The Israeli defense, renowned for its Iron Dome system, which has consistently intercepted over 90% of rockets, found itself overwhelmed. Not only did rockets rain from the sky, but the Mediterranean Sea, a natural barrier, was no longer safe. Hamas defied the long-standing naval blockade, landing on Israeli shores. But the true shocker was Hamas's audacious air strategy. Hamas militants took to the skies using powered hang gliders, bypassing the air defenses and infiltrating Israel. The rapid assault resulted in heavy casualties. With the nation reeling, Israel responded.
No food, nowhere to live, and everyone is attacking us. And they destroyed our homes. We can't live like this.
The loss in Gaza has already started mounting. Airstrikes have been carried out on Hamas's positions in Gaza, signaling the beginning of a full-blown conflict. But the true impact of such a war is seen on the civilians. In Gaza, homes have been pulverized, major blockade of food, water and electricity, and borders shut. The Palestinians in Gaza have nowhere to go.
You are watching India Today, powered by Finest, Be Sustainable Change, a BNP Group company.
Presented by RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, Growing Legacies. Co-presented by Century Laminates by Manish Malhotra, Fashion for your furniture.
Co-presented by
Macho Hind, Bade Aaram Se.
Co-powered by PolicyBazaar.com, Har family hogi insured. Co-powered by The Bold Look of Kohler. Kirloskar.
Good evening and welcome. You're watching the news track. I'm Rahul Kamal. The Israel Defense Forces getting set for an all-out ground offensive on the Gaza Strip. On the news track tonight, 4 leading international military strategists will be joining me to give our viewers a sense of what to expect when this phase of urban battle begins. How long is it likely to go on for? How hard will the Hamas be able to fight back? And will this battle likely escalate to include the Hezbollah, Syria and Iran? All that and more coming up on the news track.
Endgame Gaza. But invasion won't be easy. Will Israel be trapped in brutal urban warfare? Hamas may have already war-gamed this. Past invasions have backfired. What happens next? That is a big focus on News Track.
On the news track tonight, Gila Gamliel, key confidant of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, senior minister in the Israel government, the Minister for Intelligence, will be joining me on the news track. The first minister from the government of Israel to speak to an Indian news channel after this conflict began. Gila Gamliel coming up on the news track tonight. Israel has declared that it is working towards endgame Gaza and that it will not rest till the Hamas has been decimated. But even as Israeli forces prepare for an all-out ground offensive, it won't be that easy. The Israel Defense Forces risk falling into the Hamas's trap of brutal urban warfare. At India Today, we try and decode what to expect next and how this phase of urban warfare is likely to pan out.
Devastated by Israeli bombardments, more than 1 million Gazans have fled their homes as an Israeli ground invasion looms. Airstrikes have been unchallenged. In the face of no credible anti-aircraft weapons or air defense systems at Hamas's disposal. Destruction in the besieged Gaza Strip unprecedented. (2,670) Palestinians have been killed and 9,600 wounded since the fighting erupted on October 7th. More than 1,400 Israelis have died, most of them civilians killed in the Hamas attack. Casualties may mount dramatically in the event of Israeli forces launching a ground incursion. Much of Hamas's military infrastructure believed to be concealed in urban areas. A street-by-street fighting can't be ruled out if Israeli military unleashes a full-fledged ground assault. Israel has ordered more than 1 million Palestinians, almost half the territory's population, to move to Gaza's south. Hamas has called upon Palestinian residents to stay put. In the past, Israeli forces invaded Gaza twice. The first time in 2009 for 15 days, and then in 2014 for 19 days. When Israeli ground forces advanced into Gaza's dense cities earlier, they've been effectively targeted with Hamas anti-tank mines, anti-tank guided missiles, rocket-propelled grenades. Hamas now equipped with a newer weapon, grenade-wielding drones it used in the October 7 attack, and possible stockpiles of anti-tank weaponry. International urban warfare experts also caution against Hamas's ancient tactic of using tunnel bombs. Blasting its way through the 40-kilometer Gaza Strip may sound easier than done. The Israeli military would be going up against a group that has trained for years in hardened urban combat and possibly war-gamed such an invasion for years, despite Israel's own human intelligence and technology. With Gaurav Sawant and Ashutosh Mishra in Israel, Bureau Report, India Today.
The Israel Defense Forces currently preparing for a ground assault on the Gaza Strip. How is this urban warfare phase of this battle likely to go? How long could it take for the IDF to be able to take over the Gaza Strip? What kind of military pushback should they expect from the Hamas, which has been pulverized over the last 10 days from the air by the Israel Air Force? Joining us, four very sharp military strategists. I want to welcome first Colonel Liam Collins, founding director at the Modern War Institute, the United States Military West Point Academy. We've got Yaakov Lapin, a well-known military strategic affairs analyst and expert. Professor Ephraim Inbar is president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. And for an Indian military perspective, we're joined on this broadcast by Lieutenant General KJS Tiny Dillon. Welcome to all our guests. I want to start by asking Colonel Liam Collins at the Modern War Institute about this third ground assault on the Gaza Strip, and how long do you think this is likely to go on for? The IDF very clearly getting set for this ground assault. How much of a resistance do you think the Hamas will be able to put up, given the fact that they've been badly pulverized from the air over the past 11 days?
Yeah, I mean, Hamas will still be able to put up significant resistance, right? If you just go back to some of Israel's, earlier conflicts, these, insurgent terrorist fighters, they may not have the mass numbers of a conventional force, but they can put up resistance, right? Moving in tunnels from one location to another, seemingly popping in and out of, different stories of different buildings from underground tunnels. So they can put up, some stiff resistance. As far as how long it'll go on, I think it will only go on for a few weeks, maybe a couple months, and not because that means that Israel will be successful about destroying Hamas, which they're not capable of. But I think it has more to do with, right, the way Israel's defense is established, right? They activate hundreds of thousands of reservists. They can't keep them mobilized for too long because they have to go back to work and keep the economy going. So I think it's more of once they get to a satisfactory solution, they've eliminated enough of Hamas's capability, enough of their fighters, they'll do it. But in terms of, right, if they want to, right, control that city and own it, I mean, look, it took the Russians throwing everything they got at Bakhmut, and it took them 10 months to get that. So I think it'll be more of a limited objective to really degrade Hamas, not destroy Hamas. And then that'll take, I think less than 2 months.
You're saying that this military operation could take up to about 2 months. One of the big challenges that the Israel Defense Forces will face is the underground network of tunnels that the Hamas has built. Now, Yaakov Lapin, we know that the Israel Air Force has been targeting these underground tunnels and that several of them have been destroyed. What's your best sense at this moment of the kind of capacity the Hamas has, given what's happened in the past 11 days, to push back? Was the Hamas, in your view, already preparing and planning because they knew that after the kind of attack they staged, the IDF will come in? Has that already been thought through, or do you think they're a very battered and bruised force at this moment?
I think that they are battered, and they absolutely knew that the IDF would launch a ground offensive. They clearly factored that into this attack. Actually, since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007 through a violent coup, it began building its terrorist army, this Iranian-sponsored terrorist army, and that includes thousands of kilometers collectively under Gaza, combat tunnels to move fighters and weapons around. And they've also, set up these command and attack posts in multi-story buildings. so that they can have a good command of the combat area when they expect the Israeli forces to come in. They've spent years building this terrorist army, embedding it into the civilian population center, and therefore when the Israeli ground forces have to move in, they will be facing threats from 360 degrees, from above, from those tall buildings, as well as from drones, from the surface level, and from underneath from the tunnels. And that is what the IDF has been training for years. So those are the kinds of challenges they're going to have to deal with.
No, so what part of the Hamas's military capacity, according to you, Yaakov Lapin, has been degraded because of the aerial attacks? And how much of a military structure do they still have to be able to take on the IDF when it does come in?
I think, that we can roughly say, without seeing the actual intelligence, what we can roughly say is that Hamas has been battered, but it's been very far from being destroyed, because in order to reach those core, what they call in the military, the centers of gravity of this terror army, the command levels, the command posts, the attack posts, the ability to produce weapons, the ability to fire weapons, and the thousands of terrorists that make up the military wing, that can only be done through a ground offensive, really going from street to street, bunker to bunker, neighborhood to neighborhood. So they're battered, but they will only be demolished as a fighting terrorist force by forces on the ground, by boots on the ground.
General Dillon, we saw during the Russia-Ukraine war questions being asked about the future of armored warfare, tank warfare, especially now with drones, the ability to be able to penetrate a tank from the top with a precision fire. The Hamas showed incredible military sophistication in the attack that it mounted on the 7th of October. But we also know that the Israelis have been looking at what happened in that Russia-Ukraine war and learning those lessons. From what you understand, how do you see this phase of urban warfare progress once it starts?
Good evening, Rahul. At the outset, I must put a caution that no two battlefronts, no two battlegrounds, no two battles are the same.
Sure.
We are just talking about Russia-Ukraine vis-a-vis Hamas-Israel or IDF. We must understand Gaza Strip is only 365 square kilometers of the real estate. North-south, it's about 40-42 kilometers. East-west, it is from 8 kilometers to 12 kilometers max. Tank warfare needs maneuver space. It needs elbow space. Wherever, say, it's about 8 to 10 kilometers of width of Gaza Strip, only about 500 meters to 1 kilometer towards the Mediterranean Sea, and similar distance towards the buffer zone on the east is what is clear area where the tank columns can move freely. In between, 6 to 8 kilometers is very thickly populated, densely populated, built-up area, multi-story concrete, as the co-panelists were saying, the tunnels underneath. So this is going to be a very, very sluggish battle, and it has its own complications. I said maneuver space, so armor columns cannot be used in conventional tactical assault formations, where you line up with intercept distance of 50 meters to 300 meters, depending on the visibility and the type of threat from the enemy, and you go tally-ho. It's going to be house by house, lane by lane, block by block clearing. And what are the problems of built-up area of such density, where multi-story buildings with windows, doors opening onto the streets, lanes and the by-lanes? A well-sighted sniper can stop a platoon for 3 to 5 hours by shifting room to room, shifting window to window, carrying his ammunition boxes, carrying his belt boxes. And the columns who are in the lane or on the street, they are vulnerable for attack from the ground level or fire from the 7th floor of a building, which they may not be able to see. So and then the tunnels inside, underneath, they will be heavily booby-trapped. Once the Hamas vacates those tunnels and moves out, melting in the civilian population, they will leave them highly booby-trapped, so any entry into that would be very risky, and I don't think the Israeli forces would physically enter those tunnels. They will have the deep search detection systems. They would have activated their human intelligence assets. who would tell them the exact location of the tunnels, the explosives, the ammunition which are dumped there, and then they will destroy them by top attack ammunition, by either from air or from drone or by direct firing of weapons who would have been able to reach them.
Professor Ifram Inbar,
classical armor assault,
given the
or
fact
even
that,
for that
on the 7th of October, the Hamas mounted the kind of attack that it did, has led many to wonder whether they've actually prepared for the next round. Because when you go in and attack Israel in the way that you do, in the way that they did, they know that there will be a very massive pushback. Do you think they've thought this through in terms of their strategy for this phase of war as well, and are prepared for what Israel is bringing? Or is it that now, because they pulled off that attack, people are over assuming what the Hamas is actually capable of, because it's not a proper military force. They were just a group of terrorists to stage a spectacular account, but can't possibly have war gamed this all the way through.
The Hamas strategy is quite clear.
Exactly.
They provoke Israel to attack. There are not too many routes to attack, and they don't mind having many losses. They'll retreat, hoping that the international community will intervene, particularly after pictures of coming out of Gaza, and will stop Israelis to continue their mission, hoping that they will be able to exact many casualties in order to change the mood in Israel. This is a strategy, and it remains to be seen if they will be successful. Anything less than dismantling the military capabilities of Hamas will be considered in Israel as a failure. And maybe they think that they have a chance to prevent this type of outcome.
What is Hamas's end game according to you, given the fact that they attacked the way that they did on the 7th of October? From your experience at the Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security, what do you think the Hamas is expecting to do? Because you're looking at this battle from Israel's perspective. Let's just spin that on a moment. In this phase, when the IDF comes in, what's the Hamas expecting? Because in none of these scenarios does the Hamas actually win. They can delay, stall, make the Israel defense forces take losses, but there's no way that that the Hamas actually wins.
Allow me to disagree. I think that they have already scored a great success in eroding seriously the Israeli deterrence. And this is exactly why Israel is so determined to finish Hamas. They were successful. They hope to cause many more casualties to Israel, which will add to their success. And this is their end game. And don't forget, this is an organization that believes that God is on their side, and you don't have a really more powerful actor in the world than God. And so they are waiting for an Israeli attack to fail.
Colonel Collins, do you buy that theory that from Israel's perspective, Professor Inbar saying Hamas's perspective is that they've already won, and as Israel comes in, as their casualties mount, that's even more victory looked at from Hamas's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Hamas is right. I mean, they're playing a long game on this, and they knew there was going to be retaliation. They expected Israel to come in, and it was meant to provoke it. So in their mind, that's a win, just as right Al-Qaeda in Iraq when the American forces went into Fallujah the first time and then stopped that operation because they were worried about collateral damage. Then Zarqawi viewed that as a win for Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So I think that's historically, if you look, they will view these kind of operations. They went in, killed a lot of Israelis. The Israelis will come in there and do some significant destruction. But in their mind, that was a tactical, maybe even operational, strategic victory for them.
Okay, I want to just step out for a moment and look at whether this is likely to escalate into a two-front conflict. And if it does, then can Israel take on both the Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the Hezbollah in the West Bank and in Lebanon? So let me put that question to Colonel Collins first. Looked at from the outside, of course, we know that the Israeli Defense Forces are the most competent army in the Gulf Arab area. But we also know that Iran has been training the Hezbollah, and the Hezbollah is now better armed than it has already been. And we've already seen the Hamas's capabilities. How is it likely to turn into two-front war? And if it does, how is that likely to go militarily?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question we're waiting on. I mean, if you look historically, the evidence would tell you there's a good probability that it will happen to be a two-front war, right? If Lebanese Hezbollah want to bog Israel down and keep them from committing all of their energy into Gaza, then that's entirely plausible. And again, looking historically, it's more likely than not that will happen, but it doesn't mean that it will happen.
Yaakov Lapin, your sense of whether it is probable or inevitable that this is likely to turn into a two-front war, and if the Hezbollah does get involved, how do you see that Iran versus Hamas and Hezbollah simultaneously, that war play out?
Well, let's look at what's already happened. The Lebanese arena is already involved. For the past 5 days, there hasn't been a day that's gone by without anti-tank fire attacks from Hezbollah, attempts to cross the border by terror cells. We've had casualties in Israel, and Hezbollah has sustained casualties in Israeli return fire. So it's already involved. Relatively speaking, it's at a low level, and this is very deliberate. We had the Iranian foreign minister very recently in Lebanon coordinating. Lebanon is actually, really held hostage by Hezbollah, which is an Iranian terrorist army, just like Hamas, but far, far bigger. And what we're seeing is Iran synchronizing its entire regional access and getting ready for the next phases of this war. And the instructions that the Iranians appear to have given to their proxies in Lebanon, Hezbollah, is harass Israel, keep it focused on the north so that it can't focus on the south fully like it wants to, but also it's willing to take the risk of that deteriorating into a full war. I don't think Hezbollah is deterred by that at all. It's willing to take that risk and to fulfill Iranian orders.
No, so let's look at it militarily. If we were to war game this, now the Hezbollah has been attacking and the Israelis counter-attacking in southern Lebanon and in the West Bank on a limited basis. Do you see this escalate into an all-out war? And if the Israeli army is fighting the Hezbollah and the Hamas simultaneously, how is that war likely to go? And why I ask this question is because in the past, when Israel has gone to war with Arab countries, very often the effort, for example, in the 1973 war also was to ensure that civilians weren't impacted in quite the way that the Hamas did. They just came in and killed whoever they came. It wasn't a combatant versus combatant war, it was a combatant versus non-combatant war as well. So how do you see that going, Yaakov Lapin?
Well, in many ways, what Hamas did on the 7th of October, this mass murder invasion of border communities, is exactly what Hezbollah had been planning to do for northern communities right near the border for many years. They even boasted of these plans invading the Galilee region, which is the Israeli region next to Lebanon. So Hamas did it first, and that means that Hezbollah has lost an element of surprise. So it may still, if it decides to enter this war fully, then it may still try to invade northern Israel with its terror death squads, just as Hamas did. But it would run into a far more ready Israeli military, heavily deployed along the northern border. I would expect the Israeli Air Force to lead the Israeli response in the northern arena for the first stage. If that actually escalates, I would expect it to unleash levels of firepower that we have not seen, not in this conflict, and I don't think in this region. And I think that warning has been sent to Hezbollah and to Iran very, very clearly. We've also got two U.S. Strike carrier groups, one in the Mediterranean, one making its way into the Mediterranean. That's an American deterrent signal to Hezbollah and to Iran, which has yet to be tested. So we're seeing certainly, all of the actors in this conflict and potential actors getting their positions ready for a broadening of this conflict. And above all of this is an Iranian threat saying that if Israel moves into Gaza, which it surely will, they will activate additional fronts. The extent of that activation remains to be...
Do you buy that? Is that an empty threat, or do you think the Iranians will walk the talk?
Well, they're already doing it. Okay, this is the thing we have to, I think, get our heads around. They are already attacking Israel from Lebanon, and we've had Israeli casualties. And if
no,
there
but those
wasn't
are
a war going
limited. Those are limited battles at this moment. My question is it possible
Yes.
that the state of Iran gets involved against the state of Israel as an open
on Israel's northern border and Hamas in the Gaza Strip? The proxy warfare is the preferred manner of attack that Iran has been building. I mean, they will prefer to keep it that way, but they are making threats. And I think that it has probably been told to them that they are not immune, and that if this war escalates, targets in Iran themselves could be exposed to firepower strikes. So we will simply have to wait and see.
Professor Inbar, we know that President Biden has deputed 2 aircraft carrier groups in the waters around Israel and Palestine. Now, there are questions about whether the Americans will get involved militarily. Is this just signaling and posturing? Are the Americans actually likely to deploy their troops and their weapon systems? And the question of whether Israel will want America to get involved militarily. To have their backing is one thing, to actually want for American troops on the ground. What's your reading on that?
Obviously, Israel doesn't want American troops to fight for it. This has been the Israeli line from its very inception, and this is why it is popular in the United States. It is basically the Churchillian line: give us the means and we'll do the job. I'm not sure that the American presence in the Eastern Mediterranean nowadays will have a deterring effect on Iran. We shouldn't forget that Iran, at this time, is attacking vessels, Navy vessels of the United States in the Indian Ocean. And they are trying to attack Americans in Iraq, in other places. So I must say that the calculation, the strategic calculation of Iran is not entirely clear to me. It depends. If they think that this is an opportunity to conclude successfully their population-centric strategy with a multi-front war, one of the goals of Hamas obviously was to ignite a multi-front war, which is not only Hezbollah in the north, but also attacks from Syria, which happened already, as well as some kind of guerrilla warfare or terrorist attacks from the West Bank, and even to include riots or other disrupting activities on part of the Israeli Arabs. If in Tehran they believe, if their perception is that this is a ripe moment for doing it, I believe they will activate Hezbollah to the best of their capabilities. If they don't see this an opportunity, they may not want to spare Hezbollah, which is basically their most effective deterrent against Israel at this stage. It remains to be seen.
What's your reading of the strategic calculation in Iran? Will they want to activate the Hezbollah in an all-out offense against the Israelis like the Hamas went all out, or do you think they want to hold this asset back for some other time?
I think they would like to do it. I'm not sure their evaluation is that this is the right moment. This is exactly the dilemma in Iran.
Colonel Collins, 2 American aircraft strike groups in the waters around Israel. Are they there just as a deterrent posture, or will President Biden send his planes and his men and women in if Israel were to face a multi-pronged attack?
Yeah, I mean, this is purely a deterrent measure. As the other speakers have said, Iran is not going to get directly involved, right? They work through the proxies. That works for them better politically and strategically. And Israel doesn't need or want U.S. assistance, right? They're one of the most powerful militaries in the world. For them, it would show weakness if they need, right, any kind of air support or something like that. So at least for the current fight in Gaza, or if it goes into Lebanon, they're capable of doing that themselves. They don't want the assistance. It's really just a deterrent from Iran, I guess, getting involved directly. I mean, it's already, pretty, involvement through support to Hamas or Hezbollah. But it's really a deterrent from more involvement.
General Dillon, looked at from your lens, share your assessment of whether you see this conflict escalate first to the Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, then becoming bigger. We're already seeing Vladimir Putin go meet Xi Jinping. We're already seeing the fact that Iran is acting in close concert with anti-America countries. Do you see this becoming a much bigger nightmare? Do you think it will remain localized and regional?
When Hamas came into Israeli territory on 7th of October, and now we are almost 11, 12 days into past that incident, if it was such a coordinated thing, it would have started showing signs by now. Since no signs of this coordination or synergy between all the forces or all the countries which you named have emerged so far, so it's safe to assume, and as a military commander I will never speculate, I will always go by the military battle indications. As of now, the battle indications are that those countries are not going to get involved directly at a larger scale. However, smaller scale skirmishes just to prove a point and show their solidarity that tomorrow so nobody will tell them you didn't come in. So that type of actions will happen. And similarly, coming to the point of US direct involvement, United States boots on ground or aircrafts in the sky are not going to happen because Israel does not really need it. What Israel will need and what United States or other allies can provide is the intelligence, good quality intelligence, real-time intelligence, give out the target objectives which are getting activated, and Israel has the wherewithal from within their own means to neutralize those objectives. So intelligence sharing will happen, it has always been happening, but it will happen at more real-time and at a larger scale. As regards the other countries getting involved, I don't see the possibility at a large scale in the near future.
Okay, so we've heard from 4 military minds on the next course of action. The Israeli offensive in Gaza, the impact this could have on Hezbollah, the impact this could have on Syria and Iran, and the prospects of this turning into a larger battle than it is at this moment. You've heard different perspectives. I want to thank our guests, Liam Collins, Yaakov Lapin, Professor Ifram Inbar, and General Dhillon for joining me on the news track. The biggest question is what happens next in this war and how is that Israeli offensive likely to go? And you've just heard some perspectives from some very sharp military minds. The Hamas is holding nearly 200 Israeli civilians hostage. The terror group released a propaganda video today that showed a female hostage, Mia Shem, with her arm bandaged, looking into the camera and saying, "They're taking care of me, get me out of here as soon as possible."
21-year-old French-Israeli by nationality. Mia Shem disappeared from the music festival where 260 people were killed when it came under Hamas attack on October 7th. Nine days later, the Palestinian militant group released her 60-second video. In the footage, an unidentified worker is seen treating Shem's injured arm. In another clip broadcast on Hamas's Telegram channel, Shem